Hey everyone, how's it going? So now we're handling the form submission, or at least we're handling the route for the form submission. So when we do a post submission to the root of this page, it will go to here. Great. It's time to actually do something with that now. So what do we want to do with it? Well, we already know that we can get the data that the user entered from here. So let's go ahead and stick those into some variables so that we can use them. So what we're going to do is say var first name equals rec.body dot first name, and then we're also going to say dot trim like this. And dot trim essentially just takes the spaces from before and after the string and gets rid of them. So for example, if I submit my first name as this, it would remove all the spaces before and after, so we'd just be left with the name on its own, like that. Okay, without the spaces either side. Now it won't remove spaces from in between. So if you have a first name which has a space in between, it wouldn't get rid of that. It only gets rid of the spaces from before and after. Okay. One thing this is also good for is because we haven't done any client-side validation, which would handle an empty form submission. So at the moment, if you submitted every form with an empty field like this, it would let it through because it's not empty. We're only checking that the fields have values. So an empty, or spaces I mean, is classed as value, so it would let it through. But we don't want the user to be able to register there. So as well as the small amount of client-side validation, we're also going to do some server-side validation here, okay? So that's what we're doing right now. So copy and paste that again below. This will be for last name, and then change this to last name as well. All right, great. Copy and paste it below. And one little trick, with Visual Studio Code, if you press Shift, Alt, and then down arrow, it will duplicate the line for you. So on a Mac, it's not Alt, it's Option. So Shift, Option with a down arrow, it will duplicate that line below. So that's what I've just done. Just a little trick for when you're copying and pasting, because we do seem to be doing a whole lot of that at the moment. Okay, anyway, we've got the first name, we've got the last name. Let's go ahead and move through. We've got username right here. I can see the fields we have. So username, and then take username right there. Oops, I've got a colon there. Get rid of that. So username, trim the username, great. Let's do email as well. So email, email, and then I'm going to copy that and paste it in there because I'm too lazy to type out even email. And I think that's it. We don't want to do password. In fact, we will do password, but we're not going to trim it because the user can have spaces in their password. So we're just going to keep that as a password like that. So don't trim the password. If we did trim the password, it would mean that the user's password which goes to the database could be different because maybe they intended to have a space before and we remove it without telling them, they wouldn't be able to sign in. Alright, great. So let's just do a quick if statement right here which checks that these fields have actual values in it. So we can say if first name and last name and username and email and then password as well, like that. So if all of those have values, great, let's go ahead and proceed to the next step. If they don't have a value, we're going to do something here which is to render an error or something to the user. So what we'll do is take this line right here and put it inside the else block, okay, like this. But we're going to create a payload which will pass to the register page. If you remember, a payload is just the, if I show you around here, a payload is just the object that we pass through to the page, which has the values in that we want to use. So let's create a payload, but we might want to use it inside the if block too. For example, if the email is already in use, all these values would have been set, but we still want to render the payload back to the user. So we're going to create the payload outside of the if statement or the else block. So we're going to say var payload. Now this is going to contain all of the values that the user previously entered, and the reason we're going to do that is so that when we pass this back to the user, it will fill in the fields with the values they last used, which saves them having to type it out again. So a real simple way we can do that is just to say payload equals rec.body like that. So it starts out with this object here. So, oops, I've gone too far. So the payload essentially is this to start out with. But then what we're going to do also, I forgot an equals sign there. Var payload equals rec.body. But then what we're going to do is just add an error message to it as well. So I would just say payload dot error message equals, and inside there put any message you want. In our case, we know that it's because all the fields don't have values, so let's just say make sure each field has a valid value, like that. Okay, so great, let's go ahead and give the payload back to the user. So we can just say payload. Alright, awesome. So now what should happen is when we submit a form where one of these fields doesn't have a value, it won't hit the if block, it'll hit the else block, and we should have the register page rendered and the payload passed back. So now that we know we're going to get the payload, what we can do is add the values here. So remember, this payload has these values right here. So what we're going to do is add a value to these text fields. So value equals, and then we're going to say first name. Now, the reason we don't need any quotes around that or anything, or curly brackets, is because this right here is a pug code, so we can just directly use a pug variable. Whereas, different to this, if I open the main layout, for example, when we rendered the variable like this, the value that you have afterwards, after the element name, is not considered pug code. So this right here is not pug code, whereas this is. If you want to use a pug variable when it's not expecting pug code, you need to put the pound sign with the curly brackets around it. But because this right here is still classed as pug code, we don't need to, and we can just say first name like that. So it doesn't matter in this case if first name is not set, because it will just be null, and when you add null as the value, it's essentially nothing. So we don't need to do any checks here that it has a value, we can just directly use it. So we'll do the same for all the other fields now. So last name, I know this is pretty repetitive, but just bear with me. We don't have a whole lot more to go on this little part here. So this will be what, username, and then this one right here will be email. Actually, that's it. We're not doing the passwords. We're not going to fill in their passwords or anything. So yeah, great. All right, then the last thing we need to do is actually render an error message, and we can just do that inside the form, right above the text fields. We can put it in a p tag, which is a paragraph tag, and we can actually give that I don't know, a class of error message. Let's just say pound sign and then curly brackets, because this is not pug code. Remember, the value is not classed as pug code, so we want to use a pug variable here. So we need to put the curly brackets and just say error message, which matches what we have right here, error message. Okay, so that was a lot of stuff. Let's go ahead and submit this and make sure it works. So I'm going to stop the server and I'm going to resubmit it. Restart it, and then let's go back to here, and I'm going to refresh the page, and it's gonna, what's it going to do? I don't remember what values we had. I think they were valid. So what I'm going to do actually instead is refresh the page by clicking on the URL bar, pressing enter, and then we're here. And then I'm going to submit all of these as normal. Okay. But what I'll do actually is I'll make the first name be a space like that. So this does have a value, so it will let us submit it, but once we trim it, the value will go away. And then I'll make sure to put a matching password in there. And now, happy days. So what we get is an error message. We also get all the values back in. Now, granted, the value is still the space, but the user can see this and be like, which one's not valid? And they're like, oh, it's this one that's not valid. You see? So yeah, it's pretty cool. That's a real simple way of doing some server-side validation too. Now, there will be more server-side validation. Like I said, we're going to check that the email has never been used and that the username hasn't been used as well. And then if all is well, we're going to go ahead and insert it or create the user to our database. Now, we haven't got as far as the databases yet, but that's coming.